Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we are going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, and is it still nerd shot? All right, so I have to define the term nerd shot. So what is nerd shot? Well, let's talk about it. So basically, there's been this thing for a long time with Dungeons and Dragons, where there was an idea that it was for nerds. That was one thing that was leveled at it in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and I think, and that's the entire point of this is maybe in the 2010s, but let's talk about it, right? So, is this still a thing for Dungeons and Dragons? So, is it still nerd shot, right? So, I have to define nerd shot. So, I'm an evangelical Christian. I'm using the word shot. I'm going to say it many times. I'm going to say nerd shot. That's SHOT. What I mean is SH, put the first letter of igloo in there, T, right? So people would say, oh, that's nerd shot, right? And what they meant was that's the crap that nerds do, right? And they would say it, that's nerd shot. It was three words, and it was saying this is a waste of time, and only a nerd would do this, right? And this was very real in 70s, 80s, 90s, right? And in those decades, it was harsh, right? Now it got less harsh in each decade because there were more people playing it, and so like you weren't alone sitting in your basement with your friends. More and more you were coming out into the light, and you were having more fun with the game, and the game was becoming more popular, and you weren't alone in it, right? Now, so those words had some weight in the years in 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, and they were painful, and I definitely heard them, right? Now, I lived in both worlds. I was a nerd and a jock. I was very much, I was literally in band. I played the saxophone, but in ninth grade, I started I went on the wrestling team, and I was on the wrestling team for 4 years. I was junior varsity for like 2, and I was varsity for 2, and it was hard. It was but I was both a jock and a nerd. So like even back then, it's hard for me to say I was fully in the nerd camp. Right, so I was kind of like a king nerd, and I lived in both worlds, which and I want to be clear, I wasn't a great jock. I was not really good at it at all, but I did letter all for 4 years, and I was part of that culture, and I got invited to some parties, not all parties, but then my nerd friends, I ran Dungeons and Dragons, like so my nerd friends were like, yeah, you're definitely a nerd, like. So it was very interesting, and it was kind of an interesting thing just to see how the whole thing flowed, and it was really but it was hurtful to hear those words, and I definitely heard them. I heard them from a lot of people. I heard them from relatives. They were like, I can't believe you waste your time with that, and their idea was that like, hey, life is for winners, right? Like, and if you're playing that, you're a loser. And it was harsh, right? And so the 70s, 80s, 90s, this was very real. The 2000s, things started to change, right? And the reason why is the word nerd has a robust history, right? What does it mean, right? What does nerd mean? Well, increasingly, back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, it was like, braces and glasses taped in the middle, and awkward social interactions, and just like not a cool person, right? Somebody who just really struggled, right? Well, that has massively changed, and I think in the 2000s, this whole nerd shot thing changed, right? They're like, so then I think in the 2000s there was people who were still saying it, and they were like, oh, then nerd shot, right? And then the comeback, if it was either said or it didn't even need to be said, was, yeah, you mean nerd shot, like me being a nerd, like I'm going to be your boss, right? Like, or I am already your boss, right? And while you have a labor job, I'm a knowledge worker, and I'm probably going to make more before lunchtime than you make maybe during the week, right? Like, and so nerd started to mean money, and I'll tell you, I think it still means money today. If you are nerdy, you're hyper focused, you're a little bit myopic, you have an incredibly high tolerance for complexity, right? And so one of the things that happened in the 2000s and the 2010s was that nerd became attached to money, right? And guess what? In America, money is still power, right? It's not the greatest power. Celebrity is still the greatest power in America. But the reality is money is power, right? And so nerds weren't what they used to be because they had power. And so the term nerd now just doesn't have the weight. And so since 2000, I think the nerd shot insult has deteriorated. And in 2010, I think it was so weak nobody even used it anymore, right? So the only time you see somebody say, "Oh, D&D is for nerds," it's just really like somebody just speaking from massive ignorance who's still got their Fonzie jacket on, and like they're so unaware and out of touch that they don't know that the world has changed. Another thing I think has changed massively is I have I've been blessed. I have 4 kids, right? So I've seen 4 kids go through college, high school, junior high, elementary, right, and even kindergarten, right? And I could tell you, those, that nerd jock dichotomy is 100% done, right? And the reality, I know this sounds crazy, but I'll say it. We are living in High School Musical, right? The guy who's like, should I play basketball or be on the theater crew, or or be in the musical at school? And they're doing it both, and it's so common nobody even cares, right? So like High School Musical is a very real thing, and the jocks and the nerds are fully mixed at this point, and all those social structures are so broken down. And kids are like, they're like, I'm anime click, right? I'm video gamer, but only, like first person shooter click, right? And like it is just, and then also the other thing is, because of how young people look at identity, they don't have any problems mixing the cultures, much less, I wouldn't say any, much less than they ever did back in the day, right? So the badge nerd just doesn't, the badge nerd comes with social awkwardness now. It comes with myopathy. It comes with high tolerance for complexity. But it also comes with, I'm going to be rich, right? Like I will be your boss, or I will purchase your services, not the other way around, right? Like, I'll put out a few bucks and buy whatever you're making. You'll probably never be able to afford me, right? And that has massively changed the game for Dungeons and Dragons. And Dungeons and Dragons is just not nerd shot anymore, right? Still a lot of nerds play it, and the reality is, I would even say the vast majority of people who play Dungeons and Dragons are still nerds. There's still not a lot of, air quotes, cool people playing, but there are. And actually, let's go there. I actually think the biggest distinction on Dungeons and Dragons is not that it's played by nerds, but it's played by the wealth class, right? Not a lot of poor people play Dungeons and Dragons, right? And the reason why is, generally, we haven't reached a point, and this desperately needs to change, where people who do not, if you get to the point where you are incredibly comfortable reading 750 pages of content that are all rules and all interrelated, the type of focus and dedication that takes is going to be incredibly valuable to any knowledge worker job, right? And so people who get there and get used to what is required to play Dungeons and Dragons simply don't remain poor long. It's just a fact, right? Now, I think what we need to do, and this is why I was so big on Andrew Yang, is he was like, hey, why don't we have a universal basic income, and that way everybody, whether you're super literate, super intelligent, super confident, everybody's got enough to live and progress. And I love that idea, and that's why I stand for Andrew Yang for a year and try to make him president, but we're not there, right? And so we're in a situation where if you are not like super down with knowledge work stuff, it's going to be harder and harder and harder to make a dollar in this country. No two ways about it. It's already started, right? So all that's my opinion. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you think? And that, the other thing is, I want to tell you, if you're like, I'm a nerd and I play D&D and I am proud of that, it's not the badge of courage it once was, right? Because nerd doesn't mean what it meant there, right? So it very really, and very real, it very, very, very real meant an act of courage back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. That's not the case now. You're just playing Dungeons and Dragons, you're cool, and it's as cool as playing basketball. Like, in most schools, and from elementary all the way up to college, right? Like those distinctions are gone. That's my opinion. Do you agree that the distinctions are gone? That the word nerd really doesn't mean what it used to be, or do you think that that nerd shot is still a brutal insult and that it carries any weight today? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.